Glad you could join us today on NetFile. Welcome to the program. I'm Ayola Kasim. The African Renewable Energy Initiative plans to develop at least 10 gigawatts of new renewable energy generation capacity by 2020 and at least 300 gigawatts by 2030. This is expected to make the continent the cleanest in the world. But from available data, sub-Saharan Africa is the only region in the world where the number of people without access to electricity is set to rise. Africa's share of the world's population without electricity is expected to increase from less than half today to more than two-thirds by 2030. So how will the African Renewable Energy Initiative work? Who will benefit, and what role can the ordinary citizen play? All these and more on today's program. To stay with us. Today, some 25 countries in sub-Saharan Africa are facing a crisis evidenced by rolling blackouts. Although the African continent is well endowed both with fossil fuels and renewable resources, these are not evenly distributed, creating windfall profits for some countries and exacerbating the crisis in others. McKinsey & Company, a global management consulting firm, in its report Powering Africa, says there is a direct correlation between economic growth and electricity supply. If sub-Saharan Africa is to fulfill its promise, it needs power, and lots of it. From an electricity access point of view, sub-Saharan Africa's situation is the world's worst. It has 13% of the world's population, but 48% of the share of the global population without access to electricity. The only other region with a similar imbalance is South Asia, with 23% of the world's population and 34% of the people without access to electricity. This means that almost 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa lack access to electricity. Only 7 countries, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Gabon, Ghana, Namibia, Senegal, and South Africa, have electricity access rates exceeding 50%. The rest of the region has an average grid access rate of just 20%. Moreover, even when there is access to electricity, there may not be enough to go around. According to the World Bank, key issues in Africa's energy sector are low access and insufficient capacity. Some 24% of the population of sub-Saharan Africa has access to electricity versus 40% in other low-income countries. Excluding South Africa, the entire installed generation capacity of sub-Saharan Africa is only 28 gigawatts, equivalent to that of Argentina. Another is the problem of poor reliability. African manufacturing enterprises experience power outages on average 56 days per year. As a result, firms lose 6% of sales revenues in the informal sector. Where backup generator is limited, losses can be as high as 20%. And then there is the issue of high costs. In Africa, power tariffs in most parts of the developing world fall in the range of 4 cents to 8 cents per kilowatt per hour. However, in sub-Saharan Africa, the average tariff is 13 cents per kilowatt hour. In countries dependent on diesel-based systems, tariffs are higher still, given poor reliability. Many firms operate their own diesel generators at 2 or 3 times the cost, with attendant environmental costs.
African households pay almost 90 to 100 times the same cost for kilowatt hour of electricity as they pay in the United States, as they pay in Europe. Today, the per capita utilization of electricity in Africa is only 167 kilowatt hour per person per year. The global average is 7,000 kilowatt hour per year. It tells you that we literally don't have any electricity at all. When you look at the actual cost of using biomass, fuelwood, kerosene, and charcoal, it's immense. We lose 600,000 people every year just from relying on that because of upper respiratory tract diseases that they have.
Shortcomings in the power sector threaten Africa's long-term economic growth and competitiveness. The cost to the economy of load shedding is equivalent to 2.1% of GDP on average.
Today you have literally 640 million Africans that have no access to electricity. We have gotten used to a bad thing. It's not normal not to have electricity. By not having electricity, Africa loses today literally 3 to 4% of its GDP. We're not able to have industries working. The small and medium-sized enterprises don't work. Kids go to school and they can't learn well because they have no access to electricity. And the hospitals can't keep vaccines just because there's no electricity. It doesn't make sense. That's why I said for Africa, we're tired of being in the dark. We're going to have to light up and power this continent. If Africa today is growing at maybe 3.6% in terms of GDP growth rate, if we had electricity, we can easily be growing at 15% and 20%. This is very important for our future.
Sub-Saharan Africa is incredibly rich in potential power generation capacity. Excluding solar, it is estimated that there is 1.2 terawatts of capacity, including solar. There is a staggering 10 terawatts of potential capacity or more.
Africa is the next frontier, okay, for energy efficiency projects. And of course, in spite of some opposition somewhere else, climate change is real. And Africa is a place where this has to be scaled up.
We have so much sunshine, it burns our skins. You go all across the Sahel. We can use all the sunshine we have until it becomes the moon. We've got so much of it. We've got so much water. We've got so much wind. We've got so much geothermal energy. No, we've got to unlock all of that. And don't forget, as in the case of Nigeria, as is the case for Ghana, as is the case for Tanzania and Mozambique, they have massive amount of natural gas. And this gas can actually fire the power plants and power our industries and light up our homes. No, Africa has to use all of what it has.
There is potential for about 400 gigawatts of gas-generated power, with Mozambique, Nigeria and Tanzania alone representing 60% of the total capacity. About 350 gigawatts of hydro, with the Democratic Republic of Congo accounting for 50%. About 300 gigawatts of coal capacity, with Botswana, Mozambique and South Africa representing 95% of this, and 109 gigawatts of wind capacity, although it is relatively expensive compared with other sources. The proven geothermal resource potential is only 15 gigawatts, but this is an important technology for Ethiopia and Kenya, which hold 80% of it. Since the mid-1990s, external finance to Africa's power sector has averaged only around $600 million per year of public assistance, plus a similar volume of private finance. More recently, Chinese, Indian and Arab sources have also emerged as significant energy financiers. Nonetheless, it is estimated that doubling current levels of energy access by the year 2030 will require sustained investment at much higher levels. In December 2015, the African Renewable Energy Initiative was launched. It aims at enabling the installation of large-scale renewable energy capacity on the African continent by 2020, which would have a considerable impact on the reduction of greenhouse gases emissions in the continent. At least $5 billion in public and highly concessional finance between 2016 and 2020 from bilateral, multilateral and other sources, including the Green Climate Fund, will be needed to leverage a further $15 billion in other investments for a total investment of at least $20 billion pre-2020.
There's never been a big mobilization like this, ever, to solve Africa's energy crisis. The reason is that when Africa's Development Bank, which is the African Development Bank, decides to do something, we do it big. And so already I have committed that this bank, we're going to put in $12 billion into the energy sector over the next 5 years. And that will leverage for us 40 to 50 billion US dollars from the private sector. But we can't do it alone. We need others. There are great initiatives already in Africa. President Obama's Power Africa initiative is a great one. The French government just announced right here in COP21 that we're going to put up $2 billion for Africa Renewable Energy Initiative. The British government is working on off-grid solar systems. And we've got the Chinese also working on energy. So what we're going to do is we're going to create what is called a transformative partnership on energy for Africa that will coordinate all these various initiatives with three goals in mind. First and foremost is to work with African governments to significantly increase the share of their GDP going into the energy sector. Today, it's only 0.49% of the GDP going to the energy sector. No, we want that to be about 3.5%, and that will make available $51 billion. To solve Africa's energy problem, we need $55 billion every year for the next 10 years. I'm not scared at all about the money. Today, African countries collect $545 billion as tax revenues. If we simply put 10% of that to the energy sector, problem solved. Today, Africa loses $60 billion in terms of illicit capital flows out of our continent, monies that belong to people. If we stop those illicit capital flows, we light up and power Africa. At the same time, we have huge amount of money sitting in our sovereign wealth funds all across Africa today. And the pension funds, $364 billion in Africa pension funds. That can go a long way in solving Africa's energy problem. We have come to a conclusion that to stop the migration that you see in Africa today, coming out of Africa, the migrant crisis going to Europe, we've got to light up and power Africa.
The initiative is led by the African Union's Commission, the New Partnership for Africa's Development, the African Groups of Negotiators, the African Development Bank, the United Nations Environment Programme,